All right, welcome back everyone. So what we're going to talk about now is preparing for exam number one. And here's a quick little overview of exam number one. Because it's online, I decided to give you as much flexibility of when you take the exam as possible. So it opens up at 5 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and it will be open until 5 p.m. on Friday. It should give you plenty of time. Now, once you start the exam, you are timed. You have to finish it within 50 minutes. So make sure before you open the exam and start it, you have everything ready to take the exam, and you don't have to stop it because you can't, right? Otherwise, it'll count as your one attempt. So please don't email me saying that you accidentally started it or anything like that. Just only start it when you're absolutely ready. It'll be 50 questions. I'm basing this on the fact that looking at previous quizzes, it looks like the time that everyone's taken is about 1 minute per question. So I figure 50-minute exam, we'll do 50 questions. It'll be similar to quizzes as far as multiple choice, some true, false. Fill in the blank, I'm really going to limit because we've seen some issues with that with the quizzes. So more than anything else, it'll just be this multiple choice. All these questions are being developed from those PowerPoint slides or video recordings, and also from the guest lecture. So I'm going to give you plenty of time to review for this exam. If you haven't yet watched the videos, you might want to go back and watch those. Definitely have the PowerPoint slides and everything. This is OpenNote, which I'll say in just a bit, but it's OpenNote, so have all the PowerPoint slides in some way where you can find information quickly, or have it organized in a way where you can find it. Because I do think that, well, let's talk about Open Notes and Book. I mean, you have these resources available to you. You can't go to the internet and Google anything. You can't call on your classmates or any other individuals or anything like that. So it is just you and the materials we've had as far as notes. I suppose you could try and watch a recording. That would not be a viable use of time. The idea is that you will know some questions and you won't have to look them up. So hopefully you can be familiar enough with the material that some questions you just know and you go right to them, and then other questions you do have to look them up. If you're organized enough, it shouldn't take too long. So use your time wisely. I do think that time management is somewhat critical. So this will be covering chapters 1, 2, 20, and 3, which we'll go over in just a bit here. You can see general requirements, existing conditions, earthwork, and concrete. I will say there are a couple of questions that do require a small calculation that you should be able to probably do in your head, but you might want to have a calculator handy if you need it, or just so you have it. So starting with the design objectives and requirements, part 1 of general requirements. Some things that you should be familiar with is who is on the building team, what are they responsible for, industry standards, reference standards, who writes them, where do they come from, and how do I find them. What about codes? Who write those? Who enforces our codes? Barrier-free design, remember the adaptable buildings, providing access, things like that. Sustainable design considerations, so looking at being LEED certified and what it takes to become LEED certified, and sustainable building strategies. The second day, part 2, what we looked at were construction documents and project administration. So what's in the project manual versus the drawings? What about the master format numbering? Remember all those different sections? And there was a big change in 2004. So what does 95 look like versus 2004? So I would have these available. Look it up, different sections from the numbering, like what is number 4 from the 2004 format, or what if I said where would I find something about acoustic ceilings or something. Responsibilities of the contractor, what do those look like? And sequence of tasks from bidding to project awards. Also different types of contract delivery systems, design build, design bid build, things like that. And then we moved on to existing conditions. This is chapter 2. Chapter 2 was only a one-day lecture, and we did not have a quiz on chapter 2. So make sure you're familiar with chapter 2 topics in particular, because I'm sure they're going to be on there. And that was a video I decided not to use PowerPoint for, so it might look slightly different. But I recommend you watch the notes, because you don't have PowerPoint slides. You could print out the notes for that, and I highly recommend you do. But when we talk about land surveys, there's 3 different types. What are those? What do they look like, and could you identify it? What are the limitations of each type? What's the difference between demolition and excavation? Remember that? Above the ground, below the ground, all that kind of stuff. Then we moved on to chapter 20 with earthwork, starting with getting the site ready, preparing it, cleaning it, what's included with that process, and what site characteristics can affect the design of which building components. So it's like which way is your building facing? Is it south facing? Because then you might have sun issues or window issues, or you could have site characteristics as far as what landscaping you leave there, things like that. Then we moved on to soil characteristics, and we talked about 4 major soil types. Remember those? The sands and the gravels and the silts and the clays. How do we classify them? And how do we test our soil? How does it affect the quality of our soil, the bearing capacity, the plasticity, cohesion, settlement, based on those 4 major soil types? Which soils give us problems and why? What strategies do we have to counter moisture and temperature problems in soils? How do we get that water out of there? Continuing on with earthwork, what is excavation and the 3 major types of excavation that we covered? What are the 4 types of support systems while we're doing the excavation to keep the walls from closing in on us, right? Caving in. What are the 3 types of bracing systems for these excavation support systems? And what do they look like? What are benefits and drawback? How do we compact, backfill, and fill soils, and why do we do it? And then finally, what is grading? Why do we care about grading? What can we solve with this grading? Speaking of which, water problems. A lot of issues with water, so it's a whole slide here, right? What is erosion? How do we control our erosion? What about surface water? What strategies do we have to control the surface water or groundwater? How can that be a problem, and how do we mitigate our groundwater issues? So what about soil capillarity when it sucks the water up, right? Which soils have high capillarity? How does that affect the groundwater table? And strategies do we have to protect slabs on grade from groundwater problems? What is concrete made from, and what does each ingredient do? Different types of Portland cement. Remember, high strength or alkaline resistant. What are some sustainability considerations and strategies for each concrete ingredient? Concrete mixture vocabulary table. What's the difference between cement, mortar, and concrete? What has which ingredients, right? What are the common concrete admixtures, and what do they do? Like, why do we add a super plasticizer in there? What is cement hydration, and how does particle size affect this? And then when it's hardened concrete, what about its strength and its durability? And that strength and durability could relate to how the initial mix conditions were, and also over time. 7-day, 28-day, things like that. Concrete mixture proportioning. What about the relationships with the mixture? Strength, durability, workability when I have changes in the mixture, like my water to cement ratio. When it goes up and I have more water, and it goes down and I don't have enough water. What about the cement? I have too much cement, or if I don't have enough cement. What about aggregates? Well graded versus not well graded, or gapped, meaning I only have like big and small, I don't have the middle ones. How do we choose a maximum aggregate size? There's 2 methods, so things like that. Continuing on with concrete, testing and placing concrete. What does a slump test do? A cylinder test, air meter test. What do they measure? Why do we care? Who's responsible for formwork design? What are the components of formwork with our braces and our wailers and our joists and our plywood? What are some good placement techniques, and what happens if we don't adhere to them? So this is basically how do we place the concrete without dumping it into a form and having everything separate apart, right? Segregation. Why do we consolidate concrete? We use these external vibrators or form vibrators. Why do we do that? What can happen, or what do we have to be careful about? What are the steps to finishing a concrete slab? We talked about those steps in order, right? And what equipment is used for those steps. Also for concrete construction, for the joints and curing. What about bleed water? What is it? And how does it affect the finishing and curing? What are the 3 types of concrete joints? When do I want to use each one? Could you recognize each one if you're looking at it in a drawing? What is curing, and why is it important? What are some methods of curing, and how can curing affect strength and durability? Concrete construction accessories. So what about the rebar or the welded wire fabric that we're putting into our concrete? Why do we need it? Where would we put it? What are two types of steel? Well, I just mentioned both of them. What about the sizing? What is the naming of these, the steel reinforcing? How does that work? How do we describe the distance of rebar overlap? Remember the overlap, we have two rebars on top of one another. What about rebar chairs or embeds? What do those words mean and what are they for? Then we went to special topics. What are the types of spread foundations and 4 types of slab on grade and how are they different? What is precast concrete and benefits and limitations of those? Within precast, we have either pre-tensioning or post-tensioning. What's the difference between those and what's that process like? What are some benefits and some limitations of this precast concrete? What about concrete toppings? When do we use them and why? And what about a cement underlayment? What about gypsum versus cement-based underlayment? So that's what we covered. I would say the one thing that I don't really have in here are the slides from our guest lecture, which are really like, what do we have to watch out for cold weather, pouring concrete in cold weather or warm weather, and how can we mitigate some of the issues that come along with those. So that's the one slide I'd probably add that I didn't. I noticed that like about halfway through. So hope that was helpful. Look at the other materials on the review in Canvas, and don't forget to mark your calendar. Forget about the exam would be bad, but you can have it completed sometime before Friday at 5 p.m. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I'll talk to you all later. Thanks.